All right, well, we've got five, and I am proud to have five of you on here. So let's get started. Good morning, Barbara Dyer. How are you?
Wonderfully well, thank you. How are you, Deborah?
I'm wonderful, wonderful. Thank you for being here.
You look wonderful.
Thank you. And then, is there anyone on Zoom this morning who I haven't met before, or if this is their first time for broker strategy call? Please unmute and introduce yourself.
Hi, it's Shemaya Smith. This will be my first time.
Welcome, Shemaya. And which market center are you in?
Atlanta Classic.
Classic. Okay, wonderful. Welcome, welcome. Anyone else? All right, well, I'll go ahead and get started. Well, first of all, this is Broker Strategy Call. This is a call done by all three of the brokers with Heart of Atlanta, and it's done every other Monday. And usually it's myself, Angie, and Tom, our qualifying broker. Sometimes they do their broker chat together. Sometimes they do it separately, but we just alternate so that you guys can get a good mixture of comments from your brokers, different perspectives, things of that nature. The purpose of this particular call each week is really for you, not so much for me, but sometimes you guys don't have a topic, so I'm always prepared with a topic. And this is a place for you to ask any type of broker question. Maybe someone on the street told you something that didn't sound right. Maybe you have a question about something, or you had a success with something, or something that didn't go well, and you want to bring that up. This is a great platform, a safe platform to hear that from the broker, as well as your peers that may have experienced this as well. My name is Deborah Blue, as you see in the box there, and also in chat, you will see a handout for today. And I am bringing to you today our compensation forms. Now, you're probably going, oh my God, not that again. Well, here's the thing. It's new for all of us, and we're going to keep repeating it until you're comfortable, because in about a few weeks, Barbara, you can help me with this, we will have new contracts coming for 2025, and the brokers will go to a summit to learn all the new things that we'll be teaching you to prepare you for 2025. So
Yeah, hey, Deborah,
yes,
there's not anything in the chat.
I'm sorry.
You said there were documents in the chat?
Yes. Let me see. Maybe I
The
didn't
privacy.
let me try it again.
Okay.
I think I didn't hit the arrow. Maybe that's what happened. Do you have it now?
Yes.
It's a little delayed, it looks like. I've got a little delay on this end. Um,
Thank you.
You're welcome. So to let you know, I'll repeat that again since it looks like it didn't go through right away. Today's topic, there's a handout so that you can see the different things that we're talking about today. Okay. Now, let's review this new normal. I have been in real estate for 28 years full time. I started with Century 21 and joined Keller Williams in 1999. And I will tell you, and Barbara probably will say the same, this is the first time we've had a major change that even I have to reprogram my 28-year brain on to think it through. So it took a few classes, a few times for me to read it over and over in order for us to teach you, that's one of the reasons I wanted to make sure that everyone really understands the different ways that you can be compensated, because your consumers may think they know, and that's coming from what they've read, in magazines or online or on television or whatever the case may be. And I don't know about you, but when this thing hit in August, prior to that, CNN, ABC, CBS, all of them were reporting things that were not 100% accurate. And at the end of the day, we're the ones on the sidewalk. So we know what's accurate. We're taking the classes, we're learning, we're using it. And it was being portrayed as you couldn't make whatever you wanted to make anymore. Well, in Georgia, that's always been transparent. Now, maybe there are some people that weren't practicing that, which is what sparked this this lawsuit, which by the way has been going on for 20 years. So for some of you that are just coming in and understanding or hearing this, it's been going on for a while. It just came to a head when they actually won, and clear decisions had to be made and clear understanding had to happen. So July 1st, our wonderful contract committee prepared us by giving us our GAR changes early so we could get into the practice of compensation. And they gave us 2 additional forms. Well, actually 1. The other one already existed. It was renamed and revised. And that would be the 255, the 258, and the 259. And that's what we're going to focus on today. So is there anyone on the call right now? Did you have any other questions about something you wanted to talk about? I will leave enough room at the end for questions. And again, I understand this. This is for you. So there is no crazy question. Raise your hand. Midtown, I'm the broker for Midtown. I like to leave you better than you came to me. Okay? I'm having some Wi-Fi issues now. Can you still hear me?
We can hear you real good.
Okay, all right, I keep getting these little pop-ups over here. Okay, all right, so let's get started. Everyone's got a handout, and if you show up later and you don't get it, just pop me an email and you'll see my email at the bottom here and then again at the end, and I'll send it to you direct. So let's talk about what the new normal of compensation forms looks like. Now, we are adult learners, and you're probably thinking about what time you have to pick up your kids today, what you have to get at the grocery store. You know, I've got to write a contract, make an offer, show a property. So I try to make things a little adult-ish with some fun, where you can take bite-sized pieces and remember in your head. And who knows, some of these things you might go, I remember watching Broker Chat, and there was this man juggling dollar signs, and that helps me remember. So forgive some of the things that are in here. I just wanted to make it fun for you today. So as I said earlier, July 1st, our GAR new forms were introduced. It was a result of our council and our committee looking at the settlement to see where we had maybe some blind spots. We didn't have many, but for the blind spots, and how we could expand. And it provided language for our real estate commissions, now known as compensation. So that's one thing I have to learn how to say again, because it's always been called commission and now it's compensation, and rightly so, because we do get other things that may be commission or compensation basic. There could be a bonus on top of the advertised commission. So all of it is compensation. So I think it's a better word to be using. The GAR Forms Committee changed that word, and they did that in our July contracts. Now, what will happen in 2025, and I did find some when I was looking, reading contracts, and I teach contracts in our Midtown office. There's some areas where they've missed the word compensation. So I would dare to say we probably will have, number one, grammatical errors and changes in that aspect. But as far as any new forms or anything like that, I'll learn that later on, probably sometime in November. And it may take a year or two for those of us that have been around for a while to get used to saying the word compensation, get used to the practice of these new forms. For those of you that are brand new, you don't know any better. So you've got an advantage over us oldie but goodies. All right. So let's start with the 258. And the reason I wanted to start with the 258, even though it's 255, 258, 259, I wanted to start with the form that you really should be paying attention to if you're a buyer or seller agent, or buyer broker or seller broker is the term we use. And when you're offering some type of compensation, you will have agents calling you or emailing you or texting you to find out if your listing has compensation, or are you going to have to go to your buyer brokerage engagement or your customer engagement to inform that customer or client that I'm not going to be made whole from the seller, so I'm going to have to ask you to compensate me. Okay, so what is the pre-showing compensation agreement, and why do we have it? We can no longer rely on FMLS, Georgia MLS, or any MLS system for the most part, to tell us. We're used to going to MLS, typing in, our area, our price point, and we start pulling properties that we're going to show our clients. Or we're the listing agent and we want to entice a buyer broker to bring their buyer to their listing. So there was always a cooperation, is what we called it, where they put the agent or the broker would put that information in the MLS system for you to search and say, okay, I'm going to show 123 Main Street Saturday between 10 and 12. And oh, by the way, this is offering me a percentage, whatever that number is, 2.5, 3, whatever it is. Okay. And then sometimes if it's a builder, you will call the host at the open house or the model home and ask, what is the compensation or the commission for selling this new property? And they would tell you, or they would give you that information in writing in their contract. So now you won't have that ability to always know what the compensation is. So in order to find out what it is, our contract committee created the form called 258. Now, when I say created, it already existed. You probably never heard of it and you probably never used it, but it was called the Co-op Commission Agreement. And so they took that form rather than recreate the wheel and revised it to the pre-showing compensation agreement. So you won't find anything named Co-op Commission Agreement. It is now the pre-showing compensation. And this is the form you would use to either send to a buyer broker, or if you're the buyer broker, you would send to the seller or the seller or the seller's agent to find out what are you compensating, how are you compensating. Now, here's where, and anybody can jump in whenever you want. I'm going to go, and if you have a question, I may not see your hand raised, just unmute and jump in. One of the things that I'm getting from my particular office, as far as questions from time to time, it doesn't happen that often, but it happens every now and again, where an agent will call me and say, the agent won't send me or tell me what the compensation is until I make an offer. And I'm here to tell you that you took the time to come to Broker Chat today at 12 to learn the proper use of this form. This is not a form to hold you hostage until you send an offer. It is a form created. We're calling it an agreement, but think of this form as a disclosure. I'm the listing broker and I'm disclosing to you what I'm going to pay you. Or I'm the seller broker and I'm disclosing what the seller will pay you, because that's a new way of thinking now. Okay. Now, only because it's separated a little bit. We've always known that the seller is paying the compensation. We just have a seller broker who has agreed to split it with us in whatever percentage they decide, but they have decided to share that with us. So think of this pre-showing compensation agreement as a disclosure. And no one should be telling you on the street, I can't give that to you until you bring me an offer. Okay, that is incorrect. Any questions about that? Has anybody run into that? Because we've had it in Midtown where agents are saying the agent wouldn't give them. Anybody have a comment about it? Barbara?
No, but I was gonna ask you, so can you share with us how did you guys handle that?
I called their broker.
Okay, okay.
Then yeah. Now the broker doesn't always have to get involved. You can say to them, I'm sorry, I think you misunderstand the way the compensation agreement works. Can we all yell out the first 3 letters of this form? P-R-E, pre. That means, and what's the hyphen, the word after hyphen? Pre-showing, not I send, this is not 258, I send you an offer, then you send me a compensation agreement. It's called pre-showing. Now, the only, I would say, negative about this form is agents aren't very responsive. So if you're a listing broker, you need to find a way to download this to the client or your co-op agent, in a way that may not interrupt your day. I use a QR code. I put a QR code. Back in the day, we put flyers in our listings. I now put a QR code in the listing so that that person can download the pre-showing compensation when they get there. And they'll have all the other pertinent documents on FMLS and Georgia MLS, like my disclosures or lead paint or whatever, because we can no longer advertise any kind of compensation in the MLS or showing time. And I used to do both.
Thank you, Deborah.
Say it
Deborah, the reason I asked you to dive a little deeper into that, because for the new agents, they may think that if somebody says that to them, that that's normal, that's okay, and they may
Right.
push back. So
Right.
thank.
And that's why I'm saying it, because we the people that were calling me were newer agents, and they heard me in the contract class say this, and then they're experiencing the sidewalk where someone's saying no. Please know that all agents are not created equal. Some never take a class. Sometimes they take it once. Some wing it. You are in a company that believes in education. And again, I thank you for being here today, because you are getting it straight from the broker's mouth with receipts. All right. So about this form, it's possible that the seller or the seller's broker may sign multiple copies of this form in advance, stating that compensation. It also has, we'll look at the form in a few minutes, an expiration date on it. And that's up to the seller broker what the expiration date is. It could be 10 days, it could be 90 days, it could be the length of the listing, whatever they decide. You want to be very careful that if you show a property and you received a pre-showing compensation agreement and your buyer didn't select that house, but then maybe, I don't know, 30 days later, the house is still on the market, but your buyer wants to go back, you need to ask for another pre-showing compensation agreement, because maybe the price was reduced and maybe the compensation was adjusted. So you don't want to assume, well, I have this one from July and we're back in October. We see you're still on the market and you lowered the price. Now it's really enticing. Make sure nothing happened with the compensation as well. All right. It's important to note that the compensation being offered is applicable to offers made by the buyer's broker client or customer when defined in the time frame, which is what I just explained. And the best way for buyer brokers to protect their compensation right when being paid by the seller or seller's broker is to have the payment party sign the pre-showing. What does that mean? When you receive this form, you want to make sure the party that is paying you has signed this, whether that's the seller broker sharing or the seller paying you direct. Okay, because that is what a broker is going to be able to use if there's any compensation dispute. Okay, now this is not part of your offer. Think of this as a disclosure. Okay, I'll show you what's part of your contract. And what I just said is, when you get this signed by the party paying you, this is the beginning of there's no dispute when you're ready to make the offer that the compensation has changed. Okay. So let's take a look at the form. And of course, these forms are in that handout. The pre-showing, I've highlighted a few things on here. For instance, you've got the compensation being offered to the buyer's broker. Okay, we're used to saying buyer's agent back in the day. Now that term was changed, I think a year or two ago, to buyer's broker. That's you as a buyer agent taking a buyer out. And this will be dated. It will have the property address. And then you'll notice halfway down, or a little more than halfway down in that first paragraph, seller's broker within blank days of the above mentioned date. What that is saying, I want you to read that later on your own, but that paragraph, to just summarize it, is saying, we're going to pay you, and this form is going to show you how you, or tell you how you're being paid, and it's good for 10 days, 90 days, 365 days. When I took Seth's class, Seth Wiseman is one of our GAR counsel. He said put 365 days. He didn't really go into detail as to why he thought that was a good idea. I don't know that it is, because sometimes our sellers change their mind about pricing and compensation. And if we put 365, then you would really have to do this where it's expiring and then you redo it. So I would prefer that you use the days based on the way you run your business, or if you're the listing agent and you list for maybe 120 days, maybe you do 120 days or whatever the case may be. But you can change this form because it can expire. All right. So the first part talks about what are we giving to the buyer's broker. You can either check the box for percentage. You can check the box for a dollar amount. I had an agent call me this weekend that it's a small property, under $10,000, and wanted to know about charging a flat fee. You could put that here. All compensation is not just percentages. Sometimes it's a flat fee. And then there's another mechanism here. It could be a bonus, for instance, like a builder bonus or something like that. That would be an example of an other. And then the next part talks about the above reference compensation shall be paid by, and you select one. So you're either selecting, and this is where people got tripped up when this first started, because they're not reading the sentence. Remember word problems in school? Seller in addition. So let's say the seller is paying their listing broker a certain percentage, but then the seller said, and then in addition, I'll pay the buyer broker another percent. And that could be as much as 8% for all we know. Okay. Then the second one says the seller's broker, also remember that used to be called the listing agent, out of their compensation. This is the old school way. So this is what we used to see on MLS. I received 7%. I'm going to give you 3.5%, and I'm going to show that in the MLS. Now, when I use compensation or percentages, guys, this is for example purposes only. I'm not steering anyone in any way as to what compensation would be. When I take Seth's class, he uses lollipops and chickens, but I think that gets confusing. So I'm going to preface this by saying, this is not steering you to a certain percentage. I'm just using that so you understand how to fill the form out. And then the last one says seller and seller's broker as set forth in the other. So it could be a combination of a builder paying a certain compensation, who would be the seller, and then you getting an additional bonus. So then that would be spelled out on this line. You would check this box and spell that out right here on the other. Okay. All right. Any questions about this form?
Yes. Hi, Deborah.
Hi.
It's Tammy. I
Tammy.
put a question in the chat about, sorry,
Go ahead and unmute and talk to me.
you said that the form can expire and you can change it. Can you change it before the expiration date?
Yeah, you can. You can.
Okay.
But what you want to do is make sure you remove it from, like if you're using a QR code or you're, emailing it over, make sure you are using the correct form so you don't get confused as to, oh my gosh, I sent over, they're going to get X% and now we lowered that to something else, or the seller said, hey, if I lower to that price, I'm not going to be able to afford to pay both of you. Those scenarios are probably going to be our new normal. So if that happens, just make sure you remove whatever forms you have. And then if someone calls you to say, hey, I showed the house 2 months ago, you need to inform them, I need to send you a new pre-showing compensation agreement. That one expired, or that one was null and void, and I need to send you a new one.
So if they have one that they don't have that new one and it hasn't expired, can they put up an argument if you lower the compensation?
They might, because what's going to happen, a broker is going to look at the dates. When was it changed and signed?
And how would you protect yourself against that?
Against what?
Them having a battle over the form that they have in hand that has not expired.
Well, you would let them know. They're going to call you. Every agent, buyer, broker should always not assume because I have this, that this is still in stone.
Okay.
So what we're trying to do is train all of us to be diligent in making sure that what you have is still valid, because we don't have any way of checking that in the system. So it's going to be signed by the seller, it's going to be signed by the seller broker, and it's going to have a new date on it with a new expiration date. Because if you remember the slide before this, they can sign multiple forms.
I was a little late.
Oh, okay, no problem.
Sorry.
The slide prior to that says that the seller, the seller's broker can sign multiple usage of this form.
Okay.
Okay. Again, it's a disclosure. This is not in stone. This is just saying, hey, you're showing it this weekend. This is what it is. Next week, you're showing it again. You better ask for this again to make sure it's still the same.
Gotcha. Okay, thank
You
you.
dropped the ball and I was brokering you and said, did you check and see if that form you got last week was still valid? You might not put me in a position to argue it, because this is just a disclosure. The next couple of forms I show you will make it in stone and binding. This doesn't make it binding. Okay, clear on that? It's
Yes,
just,
thank you.
even though we call it an agreement, it's really just a disclosure.
Okay.
Okay, does that make sense?
Yep,
Because
thank you.
when we get disclosures, don't we do inspections to verify that?
Yes.
Oh, you said this problem happened with the water leak. Great. When we do our inspection, we're going to verify that. Okay, that's the
Okay.
best way to think of it. Good
Got
question.
it.
Thank you. All right, so let's break it down. Here's where I get real elementary to keep it in your head. Ask for the 258 before you go show any property. Ask for it every single time you show a property, and ask for it even if you go back again. The agent might tell you, oh, it didn't change. Great, send it to me again. Or they might say, or they might say, send over an offer before I send that to you. I want you to know that is not correct. You need to send me the disclosure, just like the lead paint is supposed to be seen by your buyer before they write an offer, or it's a $16,000 fine. Okay, so make sure that you are asking for that first. Then you're going to make an appointment, call and make your appointment, or go on showing time and make your appointment. And then you're going to show your clients homes. The reason this is important, you are getting agency before you take them out. So if you've talked to your customer or buyer about paying your compensation, if the seller doesn't pay you, or if they don't make you whole based on what you charge, because we don't dictate that, then you need to be able to say, we're looking at 5 homes today. 4 of them have compensation. This last one does not have compensation. So buyer, if you end up selecting this home, then we have to revert back to what you put on the agency form, which we're not going over agency forms today. The 4A and B and C, we're not doing that. We're just talking about the compensation form. Everybody clear as mud? You like my graphics here?
Yes.
They're cute.
Neat.
All right, so let's move to 259. 259 is where we start making things a little more binding, okay? So 259 says, now broker compensation agreement. And this is an exhibit. So where do exhibits go? How do we use exhibits? Anybody? They're part of the what?
The contract.
The offer.
Contract is right there, the answer. The purchase and sale. So let's say 258 was not given to you. The agent said, no, send me an offer, or they never answered their phone, and you have scheduled your day and you're just going to take a chance. So then you would use, when you write the offer, the broker compensation agreement exhibit as part of your offer, because you don't know what the compensation is, or you do know what the compensation is, and you can put that on here as well, because it could be used for 2 different purposes. It was the intention, and Barbara can correct me if I'm wrong, the intention was, I know what the compensation is, or I did not receive a pre-showing, so I'm going to ask, all right, to make sure they're going to compensate. The seller is going to compensate, or the seller's broker is going to compensate. Okay, so let's, go ahead.
I was just saying that is.
You broke up a little bit. On my end anyway.
No, I was just saying that's
That's
correct.
correct. Okay, all right. So it should be used in lieu of the buyer broker writing a special stip. Now, we have two special stips, 619 and 620, and I'm going to show you those at the end. You could write the special stip. The problem with a special stip, hear me loud and clear on this, because I had an agent send me their contract one day and the agent wrote a special stip and I told her, no, counter back with the 259. And let me tell you why. And was it Tammy? ASC, was it Tammy? How do you protect yourself?
Yes, it's
If-
Tammy.
Okay, if you write a special stip and you're negotiating, what can happen to that special stip? When we write special stips, let's pretend we're not talking about compensation. We're just talking about a home warranty. And the seller says, no, I don't want to do a home warranty. And the buyer says, yes, I want a home warranty. And we negotiate it in or out. Well, it's out. Well, if you put a special stip in the contract or the offer about your commission or your compensation, the buyer and seller are negotiating that as well, regardless of what your 258 said. And the seller says, well, look, if I'm bringing the price down and now you're asking for all these closing costs, and now you're going to do an inspection and probably ask me for something, I want to negotiate that 7% to 2%. Buyer says, okay, I agree with that. That gives me more money. Guess what? It would be hard for the broker to get you your 7%. You now are getting 2%. That's why you don't want to use that in a special stip. You want to use an exhibit. We have a special stip, but I want to encourage you to be very cautious about using it. Okay? And I'll show you those special stips at the end. So that's why I highlighted in lieu of the buyer broker writing a special stip or even letting a listing agent write it in for you. Say, no, I'm going to send the exhibit over. Okay? And then I just explained to you what the challenge is about this, of the broker trying to fight for something that was pretty much negotiated out of the contract. Because once we negotiate, what do we do after the offer is negotiated? We bind it. Okay. And that is because you didn't use an exhibit. And so when I told that agent, I said, no, don't take that special stip out and use this form. Counter that agent back and tell her she needs to use this form. So here's an example. I think I just gave this, and I'm using percentages. Let me just disclose just for example purposes only. So let's say that the seller agrees to pay the buyer broker 7% as compensation for finding a buyer for the property. They tell you that on the pre-showing. Later, when the seller realizes that he has to make substantial repairs to the property, the seller proposes to the buyer that they amend the buyer broker's compensation to 2%. The buyer agrees to the amendment over the objections of the buyer broker, because there will be objections. And if all the buyer broker did was include a special stip dealing with compensation paid by the seller or the seller's broker, the buyer's broker may just be out of luck in trying to collect a compensation of 7%. I guarantee you'll run into it, or you already have, or your friends have. Please tell them broker chat is a great thing to come to so you don't have these issues. And then to mitigate the risk, you want to make sure you use this form because it's going to be signed. We're going to look at the form next. And once this agreement is signed, it cannot be further, Tammy, modified without the express written consent of who? The brokers. Okay? So you sign this and everybody agrees. And now you can't go back and change it and say, oh, now I have to do all these repairs. I want to reduce you to 2%. Okay, that can happen if you do it with a special stip, but not if you use this form, unless everybody agrees. Okay, let me look in chat and make sure can you change? Okay, we already talked about that. All right, so let's look at the form. So this agreement should not be used if the broker's compensation and the party or broker paying it, seller or the broker paying it, have already agreed to a separate written agreement and it's not being modified. Okay, so if the agent says in the pre-showing, you're getting XYZ, you really don't have to use this form again. We can go to 255, which is next. But if you're not sure, you're going to use the pre-showing. If you don't get it, then you're going to, if you don't get the pre-showing, then you're going to use this form. And you're going to say, hey, you didn't tell me what I'm getting, so let me tell you what I want. And you'll say compensation of buyer broker. And this is a form I used when I was teaching, so there's something already filled in here. And I put, I want, my fee is 3%, and I want, who should pay it? The seller. So if your buyer says, oh my gosh, I've got enough for my down payment and my earnest money and that kind of stuff, I don't know that I then can pay you, then you would ask the seller. And of course, the seller could come back and cross that out and say, no, your buyer needs to pay, or I won't do 2, but I'll do 1.5 or something like that. That's how the negotiation happens. And then it says compensation of the seller's broker, that would be the listing broker, and they would put what they're being paid. Okay, so I have a listing that went under contract a couple of weeks ago, and we close next month. And I sent this, or this agent sent this form. I sent her the pre-agreement, she scanned it, but she did ask again. And what she did, and she was correct in doing this, sent this form to me, filled her section out, this section here, and it was correct, seller was paying it. And then I filled my section out, and then we signed it, because I'm the listing broker, and I was sharing my compensation with her. Okay. And then remember, Tammy, what I just said in that slide, it cannot be further modified without written consent by the parties. Okay. Because basically brokers are not a party to the contract. We're a party to the compensation being part of the contract. The parties are buyer and seller. Okay. All right, any questions on that? And then you also notice the signatures from the buyer, the seller, the buyer brokerage, and the seller. We have all agreed I'm being paid, in this example, 3%. Can't be modified unless we all agree in writing. How would
What's the date on this form, Deborah? Because I remember this being like confusing when I first looked at it, but it looks clear now.
Yes, it helps when you have stick figures, because we have adult brains. And when I did this, I'm like, I sure hope they don't think I'm like trying to treat everybody like a 5-year-old. But sometimes we just have, there's so much in our brains, and this is an election year, and everybody's uptight about everything. It's like, let me just make it simple, stupid, and just do stick figures, highlight the things, and we read it together, and not bring in the agency and everything else, because that's where it gets, if you get this part, then the agency forms will make sense. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So let's break it down. I've read certain places that I've heard people say, and I've even heard attorneys say, you're doing the exhibit, which is part of the purchase and sale agreement, and we signed it and agreed as we just illustrated. You then don't need the 255, which is the old form, not really old, still exists, form to express to the closing attorney what the compensation is for both parties and who's paying it. I'm hearing that, and that is incorrect. It's incorrect. If you read your Georgia or Realtor magazine, or probably Georgia magazine, when they broke down the different things about our new changes, it's written in there. Seth said in the article, he said it in his videos, you don't need both. So if an attorney, and I've had agents call me saying, the attorney wants me to fill out the instructions to the closing attorney. Why? It's the same thing from the broker compensation agreement, which is an exhibit to the contract that we bound. So why do you now need the instructions to repeat it? I caution you on this, because you could do the compensation exhibit and make a mistake on this instruction and then sign it, and then what? Which one is correct? You only need the broker one. If the agent tells you, I have people text me sometimes, hey, what compensation? I'll text them back, you're getting 3%. They know that's what they're getting. So they can send the instructions to the closing attorney to me, and we'll sign it, and all is well in the world. And that's still binding, because that's the way we did it before. But you don't need both. Anybody confused on that, have heard that, gone through that, you are not supposed to use both, just one. Correct me if I'm wrong, Barbara.
You're absolutely correct.
And I don't
I
mind
can
being
see
wrong.
that.
That's how we learn.
So what if there's some things that, based on additional negotiations, the buyer or seller, you're putting on there, like the buyer's gonna come out of their pocket paying the agent
Mhm. So in
more,
this
or
form, let's go
certain
back to
things
the
on there.
form. So
Say
if the
again?
buyer broker is being paid by the buyer, then you would
Mhm.
put the 3% there. Let's just say they're paying you 3%, and you would put buyer. Or let's say the seller said they'll give you 2, and now your agency said that they would pay you your 3, but now you marked a box saying you'll reduce it dollar for dollar on that agency. Then you would put buyer is going to pay, buyer broker will be paid 1% by the buyer, and then the compensation from the seller's broker would then the sell, and then other would be then the how did I say it? Buyer is going to pay you 1% and seller is going to pay you the 2.
So
That's
you
what,
would update this form at some point if they're,
well,
say,
you'll know this before you do this form.
yeah,
Be-
no, but you fill that, let's say we fill this out, and then like after the inspection, you have
Remember what
different,
I said, this is mutually binding. So there's no going
okay.
back and changing this once you put the numbers on here, unless everybody agrees, then you're going to do an amendment.
So the amendment would make the adjustment.
Make
Okay,
the adjustment, just like any other exhibit.
gotcha.
Okay, because once you're binding, that's the only time you use amendments. You use exhibits when you're offering, you use amendments after binding. Remember that. That's how I teach contracts to Midtown, so they remember that. Okay, think of the word add starts with A, and amendments amend or add to what's already been agreed. All right, so let's break it down. I break it down. No pre-showing agreement, no problem. Instead of a special stip, use 259. Once agreed by all parties, cannot be modified without written consent or an amendment. Everybody clear as mud now. You'll never forget these cartoons.
I like it.
Okay, just that you see how that big form, I broke it down to 3 things to remember about it. The only thing, Tammy gave me another one. What happens if? I can add another one saying amended. So thank you. The next time I teach this, I'll add that. All right, let's move on to 255. This is our tried and true friend that we remember before July 1st changes. And this is all we ever used, because we would go to FMLS, Georgia MLS, pull our properties. Oh, I see I'm going to get X, Y, Z, whatever. And sometimes it was lower than what you wanted. And so you would talk to the listing agent and go, gosh, why is it this? I really would like to get this. And they would, well, too bad. That's all you're getting. I'm only getting this, whatever. Here's the advice I want to give you guys. You're running your business, and yes, you want to make as much as possible. But the listing broker is the one who's negotiating with the seller, and they get to divide that if they're sharing it any way they want. I get calls sometimes from people going, oh, they're getting 4 and I'm getting 2. And at the end of the day, it's always been transparency that you could go back and see if the seller or the seller broker will pay you more. But at the end of the day, if you're the listing broker, look, you have to understand that sometimes listing brokers are spending more money. For instance, I pay for staging and professional photography and videography and all those are not, cheap things if you're doing it right. And so sometimes I will negotiate a little bit more from my side, but I always try to make sure I'm giving my co-op agent at least 3. Every now and again, I can't do that. Sometimes if I work with a REO company or something like that, if any of you have ever done any real estate bank owned type properties, these days, some of them will give you 3, some will give you 1. And so people will call me and go 1, and I'm like, I'm embarrassed to even put the number in MLS, but that is what the bank is telling me I can only offer you. Okay, and you can ask the bank for more. Good luck. Okay, so that's all I'll say about that. but this is our tried and true form that we've had for, I don't even know how long, but this is the one we're all very familiar with, very easy, but they did make some adjustments. So in a world where compensation is probably going to be more heavily negotiated, there may be some new and different arrangements for payment of the compensation. What they mean by that is maybe the buyer is paying some, maybe the seller is paying some, maybe the seller broker is paying some. That's what they mean by maybe some different arrangements. And so the instructions to the closing attorney tries to reflect. So what they did was, it's still the same form, except for they added anything that might be a different arrangement, so that the attorney will know who is paying what. And again, this form will be used if you already know that answer. Okay, so the first thing is that it's signed by a real estate licensee of a broker. We are all licensees. Even though I'm the managing broker in Midtown, I'm still a licensee under the umbrella of Tom Fulkerson, who is the qualifying. We all learned that in pre-license, that we always have to have a qualifying, and we're all licensees. And the qualifying broker can always assign managing brokers to different locations, or the same location for that matter. And even though the qualifying broker is supposed to sign this, that qualifying broker has given permission to the licensees to sign it. So that's all I want you to understand about that. The second change was the addition of a line for the seller to sign the instructions to the closing form. Please note that it should only be signed by the seller if the seller is paying the compensation directly to the buyer, not sharing with the listing agent, but directly. So seller broker negotiated their fee, and then it said something like, maybe on your agency, your listing brokerage, it's we have the line that says consideration. Let me think of how it's worded. Say, for instance, the seller says, you know what, I'll pay you, and I'll consider paying the buyer broker if they bring me a full price offer. Okay, that would be, and then they would say, okay, for that full price, I will give that buyer 3%, 2%, whatever. But if they bring me, what they're saying in a sentence like that is, if you bring me something less, I may not pay, I may not offer you a co-op fee or co-op compensation. Okay, so this wouldn't be only signed by the seller if the seller, not the seller broker, is paying the buyer broker direct. And if the seller broker is paying compensation, or also known as the listing agent, to the buyer broker, also known as the buyer agent, the form does not need to be signed by the seller. So if sharing, we don't need the seller's signature. Not sharing and the seller's paying it, you need the seller's signature. Everybody clear as mud on that. And then the third change was the elimination of the sentence that signing the instructions to the closing attorney still allowed the parties to arbitrate. So when we had just this form and not 258 and 259, then we used this to arbitrate if there was a problem. Okay, and that happens every now and again. You go through your board and grievance committees and so on and so forth. And then the thought of the committee was that while compensation claims are always arbitrated between realtors through our boards, signing the instructions to the closing attorney form should be viewed as evidence, Tammy, of the broker's position regarding entitlement to commission or compensation. Okay, so we've got the broker exhibit and we've got this that binds, that gives the broker the opportunity to do any kind of arbitration. And it should also be noted that in most cases where the broker compensation agreement has been added as an exhibit to the purchase and sale agreement, the instructions to the closing attorney will be unnecessary because the closing attorney will simply look at the exhibit 258 for direction. That's why you don't need 255 as well. That's confusing because somebody down the road is going to make a mistake and put the wrong numbers on the wrong, or who's paying what. Then the attorney is going to be calling everyone going, which one is correct? Because you didn't need to send both. And that's an excerpt right out of the GAR magazine from Seth Wiseman. Okay, It is more likely that the instructions to the closing attorney form will only be used when a pre-showing compensation agreement was signed prior to contracting. So you're going out to show Saturday, you were sent a pre-showing compensation agreement that's signed, it hasn't expired, you know what you're going to receive, you go ahead and do the instructions to the closing attorney. All right, so let's break it down. There's our attorney trying to figure it out. So remember, this form always used to say the total. So we put maybe 6, 7, 8, whatever the number is. And then the second line said shared with you, the buyer broker, in the amount of 3, 3.5, 4, whatever it is. Okay. I say 7 because when I started in business, that was a typical compensation to see. And of course, times have changed now. It's all over the place now, but that was very common to see a 3.5% commission. So, so then the second line says, or first line says, compensation paid by seller to seller's broker. So that's where that total would be. It is, you know, whatever it is your business warrants when you take a listing. And then it says compensation shared by the seller's broker, also known as the listing broker, listing agent, with the buyer's broker, also known as the buyer's agent. So let's say it says 6 up here, there would be a 3 here, or a dollar amount here and a dollar amount here. And then the compensation paid by seller to the buyer's broker, meaning we're leapfrogging over the seller broker and the seller is going to pay you direct. That would go here. And then number 4, compensation paid by the buyer to the buyer's broker. So sometimes you might have, you know, this is showing you the different ways that people could be paid in a transaction. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay. And then if we look at the second page of this form, at the top, it says further direction to the closing attorney. Okay. So there may be some additional fees. There may be retainer fees. There may be transaction fees, things of that nature. Who's paying it? How's it being paid? Okay. And then everyone signs. And then, of course, this last one where I have this arrow, if the seller is paying, that's when the seller gets involved. So if someone, this has come up as well, the buyer and the seller brokers signed, and then there was this big fight over whether the seller needed to sign it. And I said, well, is the seller paying you direct? No, the seller broker is. Then the seller doesn't need to sign this. It's only when the seller is leapfrogging, maybe I should have done that as an illustration, over the seller broker, and they're paying you direct, then they would sign that, because now for the brokers in your office, this gives us a form to say, you committed to this. Now pay up. Okay. So let's break it down. In a world where compensation may be more heavily negotiated, new and different arrangements for payment of compensation may exist. The instructions to closing attorney form tries to reflect all those different possible arrangements, which we just looked at. And also, you already have permission from your brokers to sign the form, because it says broker/affiliate licensee signature. So when you see that, that means either the broker is signing it or the affiliate, and we're all on this call affiliates. So we have permission from our qualifying broker to sign this form. If you're sick or MIA or whatever, and something's being held up, then the broker could sign this on your behalf. Okay.
I love that more heavily negotiated animation.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's like back and forth these days. Like, you know, I think it was always like that, but now it's a little more anxiety behind it and anger. So I don't know, but I think it's because so many people don't understand these 3 forms and how to properly use them, that you know, sometimes I think they're making up stuff when people call me and say, and I'm like, well, where can they? And see, I'm big on receipts. Can you show me where it says that? Because I've read this contract, and usually they can't. It's their way of negotiating. So don't fall for it. You know, if you know your contract, don't fall for it. And for those of you that are newer agents, do not be intimidated by a seasoned agent or that you think, oh, well, they've got more time and, on the sidewalk, they know better. And you know better because you just came out of school. So,
Right.
Someone like me, I'm in classes all the time. And that might seem like, well, 28 years, why? Because I need to stay on top of my game all the time. Okay. All right. So I promised to show you the special steps. So when you look at your table of content in GAR, there's one for special steps, and they're indexed, and then they're also spelled out based on the SS number. SS means special step, and then it's given a number. So there are two that are in reference to all these new changes. The SS 619, more than likely you will need to add this to the exhibit. So remember when we had the 258, 259, yes, 258. Then there's a special step section when you're dealing with maybe a VA loan. And I haven't heard any more about VA. If anybody has on this call, please enlighten me. But VA, let me go back a step for those of you that are new or may not know. I'm an Army brat, so I know a lot about VA loans. The VA did not allow the buyer to pay closing costs or to pay, not closing costs, compensation. So sometime in maybe April, May, they made a big announcement. It was a temporary thing from what I understood, and I don't know how long temporary is, that they would allow their buyers to pay compensation or commissions. And this special step was developed by our council and committee to add to our contracts, our offers. So now you would use this SS 619 in your broker compensation exhibit under the special step if it's a VA or vet, to let them know, hey, we need you to pay. And so this is why. This is a VA loan. And then 620 was always existed, where the buyer is requesting the seller, because you can't ask the seller directly, so you have to use a special step. And this was the proper use of a special step to say, buyer hereby. The buyer can request, you, the licensee, cannot. Can you sit down and have a consultation with your buyer and say, in order to work with me, I have to have agency in the state of Georgia in order for you to hire me, and we go and look at properties, I have to have this signed. Okay, that is a fact. It always has been. Okay, some of us have been a little lax with that, but it's always been that way. That's not new. Then you say to them, hey, by the way, sometimes compensation may not be offered for the house you pick. If that's the case, you're going to need to pay that. And the buyer says, I don't know that I'm going to have enough money to pay you. Maybe you only show me things that do have compensation. They can say that. But you could also say to them, well, we do have the ability to ask the seller, but you would have to request that, and I have a special step for that. You're welcome to say that. I think when we first started this, everybody was saying, you can't say that, you can't steer them, all that kind of stuff. Words matter, and there's a way for you to say it that sounds steering. But when you are guiding people as to what the contract says and the ability for negotiation, that's what your consultation is about. To say that I understand you may not have enough money, but there's all different ways to pay the compensation. It can be split between the parties. It can be paid strictly by you. It can be paid strictly by the seller broker, the seller. All of those are available, and we have the ability in the forms to request that, but it has to come from you, not me. Did that sound like I was steering anyone or guiding or consulting? Okay.
Consulting.
Yeah, because we're the experts. I hate to use that word, but we're the ones that are taking the classes and learning what the contract says and reading the contract. Hopefully you're reading it. And therefore, you should be able to consult someone through it. Oh, yeah. All right, questions about this special step? I say use caution tape with special steps because again, if you're just putting it in the offer on the purchase and sale agreement, it's a little harder to make sure that we can protect that versus using the forms that the contract committee has provided us. Okay, any questions about that? Questions? We finished on time. Can you believe it? Comment?
Great
Can we,
session.
can we please go back to the instruction to closing attorney form?
Yep.
When the buyer paying, let's say 1% and the seller paying 1%, is this, no, not this one, the other form.
The broker, the 258.
Um,
258, the broker, this one.
yes, this one, please. Because I put 2% by the seller and on other I put 1% by the buyer, but the other agent corrected it to 3%. And on the other side, she said 2% by the seller and 1% by the buyer. Is this correct?
Yeah, you can do it that
They
way.
both okay? They
Yes,
both
because what she was communicating to you is you already agreed that the seller broker was going to pay a certain percentage. And because her standard for her business was a certain percentage, then the buyer agreed, and she probably had on her buyer's agreement that we'll reduce it dollar for dollar, you know, because she probably had a higher amount, but because she
actually it's me. I'm
yeah,
representing the buyer.
so
Yes.
she just said, guess what? You're off the hook for 3. All you need to pay me is 1. Seller's paying me 2. Now the attorney knows where the money's coming from.
Exactly. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Good questions, you guys. Give me some feedback. Did this help you with the illustrations and taking our time and peeling it apart a little bit more?
Yes, so much.
Yes.
And I need to learn how you did it.
How I did what?
The illustration.
Oh, I used to be an architect and I have a right brain of design. So
Oh,
I have a
wow.
lot of software that I can do stuff like that. All right, any other questions? Good, good. I've been thinking this through for a while. How do I explain this to you guys to just kind of break it down into bite-sized pieces? Because the calls were coming in and I'm going, no one's saying anything. They're saying they understand. And then I get the broker call that I'm like, then you don't understand. So that's why I'm trying all different ways. I've done the lecture, I've done the paperwork. I said, I'm going to do stick figures. Stick figures, our brains are already fried. If I can show stick figures, we can keep that in our head. Like, I remember the 2 guys fighting and then that kind of thing. So thank you for the feedback on that. Any other questions before we wrap up?
I have a general question, please,
Sure.
Deborah. So when some agents say that the buyer's brokerage compensation is negotiable and have your client submit a higher offer and then the seller will pay higher commission, I feel there is like, this is not on the best interest for my client. Correct?
Yeah.
Yes. And I don't know why today call, they said, yes, it's negotiable, but I really don't like this. Like
They shouldn't be saying negotiable. It's conditional, because if you look at the agreements that we have, the listing agreement, and read that, it says there's another box you can check, conditional, and then you write the reason and say, if I get a full price offer, I'm willing to pay blah blah blah. But if I don't get a full price offer, I don't know that I can pay that. You know, I always tell agents when I'm teaching the contracts, I don't look at the first page first. I look at the special steps because that's where the skeletons are hidden. Because everybody likes to say, I gave you full price. And then I go to special step. I want a warranty. I want closing costs. I want your husband. I want the dog. I'm like, okay, well, this is no longer a full price. More like priceless. So I always go there first because I'm always happy to get an offer. And I see it's full price. And I'm like, let me go to the back and see what else they're asking for. And then that's where we chip away that full price. Okay. So I think like I said earlier, words matter. And when people don't explain in the terms of the words that are given to us by our contract by saying it's conditional. You could call me and ask me and I'll say, you know what? The seller is only paying me and they'll only pay you conditional on, and that's in writing in my listing agreement, blah, blah, blah. And that's something you can also, well, no, you can't put that in FMLS. I was getting ready.
Yeah, somebody put it in the FMLS, Deborah.
You can't put anything about compensation.
And I copy it to my buyer and they feel
my brain is still going into FMLS. You cannot do that. So that's why the pre-showing is so important, that they can tell you that, you know, and they can send that to you. And that's where I think it'll be interesting to see what 2025 contracts will look like based on maybe some feedback of what everybody has experienced since July. Barbara, are you still here?
I am.
Do you have a comment to answer? I think it's Zena.
Yes, correct.
No, as a matter of fact, Deborah, you've done a great job. And the only thing I could add to what you've already said is ditto.
Okay, so it's a conditional is what they really mean, instead of saying it's negotiable, because if it's negotiable, I already told you what I wanted. So it's a matter of understanding what negotiation means and what conditional means. That's two different things. That's why words matter.
It's
So
true.
it's not negotiable, it's conditional. So then I would say, well, you're saying negotiable. Do you really mean it's conditioned on whatever your seller told you? What is that? Then
Deborah,
that's going to be clearer.
yeah, he actually put it in the FMLS. They said, buyer's agent, be aware, the strongest of your buyer's offer depends on how much you will get paid.
Yeah.
So I copy it to my buyer and they say, yucky, we don't want to see this house. And I was relieved. I really don't want them to see.
Yeah. Already that person doesn't understand the contract. And so when they show you who they are, believe it.
Believe them.
Any more questions? You guys have been a joy. I mean, I love the participation, and hopefully I was able to bring it to you in bite-sized pieces. That's what I try to do. I do plan these things and make it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right, you guys have a great day. Go sell some real estate. Oh, and let me remind you, we're going into holiday season. Pay attention to your calendars. Don't have closings on Christmas. Don't have closings on Thanksgiving. Don't do inspections on those days. Make sure when you say 3 days, 7 days, 10 days, look at your calendar and make sure you're not tap dancing on a holiday.
And Veterans Day.
And Veterans Day, November 11th. Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you guys. Have a good day.
Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.